Hi there, this is Mr McDonald from Walbottle Academy, and I'm just going to give you a quick, short, maybe 5-minute talk through on some ideas to do with Eric and Sheila from Inspector Calls, and perhaps why we might feel sorry for these children. So let's have a look at Eric to start with, a man of two halves. So you probably know the quote, half shy, half assertive, quite well. I know that's the sort of thing most Year 11s would walk about with and immediately ream off Eric. But I think if we looked at these two quotes and put them on this seesaw thing here, we'd see that the half shy element is really as a result of his insecurity and the fact that his family are living life on the edge. They seem to be smoked in this desperation to maintain their status, which I'm sure you've written about. But you look at the way that his father immediately launches into this word blame and shame from both of his parents here. And what we have here is a real knife edge for this boy who feels a constant pressure to maintain his father's legacy or to maintain his family's reputation, status, and position within the establishment. What we also have here is quite an interesting idea about men post-war. So we can start to look at ideas around gender here. And if we look at how young men would have returned from the war, if indeed they did return, there would have been a real re-understanding of what it means to be a man. Not only because women would have adopted a lot of different roles during the war and had to perhaps fill the roles on farms or in factories for men, but also what it means to be heroic or what it means to be strong, what it means to be traumatized. And if we look at the way that the inspector says that she was just used for the end of a stupid evening, drunken evening, as if she were an animal, I think that devaluation or dehumanization of human beings after the war would have been a really interesting poignant aspect for men in the audience in 1945 to be looking at and taking away, that the half shy element of a man is something that is going to be resonating, I think, with young men at the time. Then we have a look at the half assertive aspect. Now we know that he is a man who's been lucky enough to have such a wealthy and high rank in society. And this is what I find interesting about the quote, "You stole the money." Eric says, "Not really." I think there's a lot to that quote. I think we could talk about how he feels that was his money anyway, and he was entitled to that £50. Or also, what is theft within a family? Is it not just his father should have been paying him more or should have been giving him more in perhaps in terms of love or respect, and he feels that he's owed that money perhaps. Then we have a little think about young men in that world, this toxicity you've probably been talking about in terms of other texts, and when he even admits to it being a chat when you can a state when a chap can easily turn nasty. Again, there's a debate to be had here and wrestling with the idea of masculinity and almost the excuse of your predatory behaviour here, as if it was allowed within that world to fill the shoes of old Joe Meggerty. And then finally, this idea of him being the heir to the throne. We have a lot of evidence in this play of Berling putting the crown on Eric's head and really pushing it down and saying things like, "Be quiet, Eric," or "Just let me finish, Eric. You've a lot to learn." This pompous arrogance from Berling would have made that crown very uneasy on Eric's head. And he would have probably spent most of his time distant from his family, literally in this case. He's away from them at the start of the play. He takes himself upstairs, either distant in the palace bar, in his bedroom, walking around, hanging out with the likes of Eva, or probably drunk as the other idea, which is why the squiffiness is probably a real form of escapism. So when you're writing about Eric, just have a think about how he might be this dichotomy, this wrestled character, a man of two halves, and how he might be struggling with that and how that might have influenced his behaviour. Let's talk about Sheila now. She too is a woman of two halves. She's described at one point in the play as half serious and half playful. It's around the time that she learns about her fiancé Gerald's affair. And I think this is a really important moment for us because we understand here is a woman who has been trapped in the mold of a subjugated woman for many years. But that half playfulness that she has, like women of that class sorry, that women of her status would have had to be almost told what to wear, told how to behave, and is this the one you wanted me to have? Obviously, is the greatest example of that subjugation. And I get the feeling that when she is half serious, when she says to Gerald about what he was up to last summer, I think she knew that he was perhaps having an affair. And it's quite bleak to think that her mum, when her mum says it's something you'll have to get used to, that this idea of subjugation is being reinvented. And she does quite rightly say, I'm not a child, I've a right to know. I think she's standing up for herself as a young woman, and not only in terms of taking responsibility by saying we helped to kill her, and she points the finger a lot of her family. I think she's a real advocate there for a strong woman's voice as well, because she goes from saying, is this the one you wanted me to have, and toasting her engagement, and I suppose I'll have to toast to you, Gerald. And that playfulness, I think, is just a facade. I think underneath, I think she's feeling as though she's struggling to get out of these shackles that she's been placed under by society. And when she says that we aren't the same people that we sat down, and even though she's this uniting power for the Burlings, and that she's going to bring them together and no longer competing but working together, I feel like she is the one who's ultimately changed the most. And as a inspiration for young women in the audience, I think she's going to be a real emblem of young female power for them, which perhaps, is something that her brother Eric can learn from as well, but perhaps is too late for her mum. So have a think about how these two characters are wrestling in this warped and fractured world, and how they're being pulled apart by society and by their family and by morality, and how that might be something you could perhaps excuse. Okay.